Chris Sale, Cy Young candidate?
This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Baseball Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into the Atlanta Baseball Party, your home for the best Atlanta Braves baseball talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me are Grant McAuley and Jarvis Davis. From brakes to exhaust kits and beyond, eBay Motors has over 122 million parts to keep your ride or die alive. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to bring home that big win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions do apply, and eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. And of course, our Atlanta Baseball Party is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So missed opportunities cost the Braves a W to begin their road trip, but some good things still happened for this team Tuesday. And there are also still some positives coming from the pitching rotation. So Grant, let's get right into it. We're about a quarter of the way through the season, and the Atlanta Braves couldn't ask for much more or much better from Chris Sale. Sale owns a 2.22 ERA through 9 starts, 56 and 2/3 innings, 70 strikeouts, just 8 walks. And it kind of reminds you of his Cy Young caliber peak. So do you feel like Grant Sale is maybe back at the peak of his powers? And is it too early to mention him in Cy Young combo?
All right, I'm going to answer the second question first. The answer to that is no. It is not too early. If we're making those lists and Chris Sale's not appearing in that top 5, maybe even top 3 in the National League, then I don't really know what list we're looking at, because he has been that good for the Atlanta Braves. Now, is he the same guy that he was 8-9 years ago with the Chicago White Sox, or even early in his Red Sox tenure? Mm-hmm. Maybe not. But is he still the guy that has a mid-90s fastball, a wipeout slider, a changeup that he can really count on to, put himself into the game's elite strikeout pitchers, and with the control? Yeah, he's absolutely still that guy. So the Braves have to be feeling very good about that. And I don't think that we expected it to be, the pitching carrying this club to this point. But when Spencer Strider went down, and I talked about this a lot on the Braves postcast, everybody got a battlefield commission. Everybody's got to step up. They got to do a little bit more. And Chris Sale has certainly done his part thus far.
And I think that's a critical point that you make, Grant, because I'll tell you this, and I know we'll kind of talk about this again maybe next week or the following week as we get on the other side of that Memorial Day first sort of mile marker, if you will. But yeah, I think when this season began, we just assumed, okay, Ronald Acuna Jr. is going to be, if I can use that term again, at the peak of his powers. And I chuckled because you tweeted something out a couple of days ago where you said, all signs of life. So we're getting there, but still not even close to where we thought Ronald Acuna Jr. would be at this point in the season, right? And then we look at Ozzie Albies just kind of coming back to the team, period, and then kind of getting slowly but surely into form. Austin Riley, we'll talk about him a little bit later, but Austin Riley was someone who, before he went down to injury, was rounding into form, but it was a slow round. And then just to kind of finish out at the top of the order, Matt Olson is kind of starting to look like Matt Olson. But again, all of the players, all of the hitters that we just mentioned, emphasis on starting to. Even the conversation that we'll have around the middle and bottom of the order, it seems like everybody, with the exception of maybe a Travis d'Arnaud initially, right, who kind of carried the Braves through a patch there, if you will, and Marcell Ozuna, who's been carrying them, period, the conversation keeps going to kind of rounding into. We thought, Grant, Chris Sale would be rounding into form coming into the first quarter of this season, but we're actually seeing him pay out big dividends early. And I think we can say the same, honestly, about Reynaldo Lopez, because he's a guy who you kind of thought, okay, where he'll give his biggest dividends would be what he'd be doing possibly and assisting with the bullpen. But slowly but surely, as you kind of got through spring training, you saw, maybe there's a possibility and an opportunity for him to do something in a different space, maybe a starting space. And you're seeing that with him already as well. You're talking about 46 and 2/3 innings throughout this season and a 1.54 ERA, 44 strikeouts, a whip of 1.07. I mean, you're really getting some good dividends from Reynaldo Lopez as well. And I think, dare we say, he's another one who, if not for him, we may be having an even, I guess, not a more concerned, but maybe even a more cautionary conversation about where these Braves are, if not for the start that he's given them so far this season.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, it's been the rotation and the pitching staff at large that has been
Yes.
the driving force of this team. Did you expect it to be Reynaldo Lopez leading the staff in ERA? Probably not. And especially when you were talking about when this team first showed up at Northport, it felt like it was kind of news at that point that, wait, Reynaldo Lopez is going to get stretched out and be a starter. Well, that's interesting. Might have come up at Braves Fest a couple of weeks before, but when he was signed, I was looking at, all right, they are loading up the bullpen with some big strikeout arms. They brought back Pierce Johnson and Joe Jimenez. They went out and got Aaron Bummer. I mean, like they were doing all these things that felt like building a super bullpen. And instead of doing that, they pivoted and moved one of those guys into the rotation. But come to find out, the conversation for Reynaldo with the Braves was, hey, I'd like the opportunity to start if you guys are open to that. And they said, we certainly are. And they looked at, I think, a contract that if he is in the bullpen and it costs you $10 million a year and he does the kind of stuff he did the last few years, great. He's a reliable pitcher, might be able to step into the closing role. He's just a power arm that you like to have. And the teams can't have too many of those. But if he starts and does anything close to not what he's doing right now, but just being a serviceable or better major league starter, those guys cost a lot more than $10 million a year. So you've really kind of checked a whole bunch of boxes from A, the talent and the output on the field that you want, but B, economically speaking, you're not going to go out into the free agent market too many years and hit on a $10 million starter that does the kind of things that Reynaldo has. So that might have been kind of a long story, long answer. Am I surprised by the level to which he has gotten back into the rotation and seemed like he may be enjoying like not just a renaissance, but maybe the best period of his career? A little bit, but you know, he had the big arm. He has the capability of doing it, and that's exactly what he's gone out and done. Put him together with Chris Sale, resurgent Max Fried. I feel like a capable Charlie Morton who, even when he's not at his best, more times than not is able to grind it out. That's four capable starters. They'll figure out that fifth guy. But the offense, they got to figure a lot of things out. And I don't know if I'm ready to sit here and say they're kind of there, almost there. I just feel like there's going to be a period of time where they flip that switch and things finally start to line up from the expected stats that we're seeing, the hard hit rates, and the talent that's on this team. When all of that comes together, the Braves can play some better baseball. And after saying all of that, let me also point out, this is a club that's still 9 games over 500, hasn't clicked, hasn't played its best, and typically gets going in the month of June. So a lot of things could be in the offing. We'll see how the 2024 script is written.
Indeed. And, you know, I was thinking the same thing, like here we are at like May 22nd, right? And we're thinking to ourselves, we're getting close to Memorial Day. We're getting close to June. We're getting close to All-Star. Well, the reason we keep mentioning those mile markers is because of the very thing you said, Grant. We've seen it time and time again these last couple of seasons where these Braves, even if it's one Brave that gets a slow start, or if it is a part of the order that has a slow start, eventually they just kind of click, and you're kind of hoping for that. And as we'll talk about later in the show with Jarvis, you're starting to see some positive returns in terms of rehab assignments and how those rehab assignments are going to get the Braves started, particularly Sean Murphy. So I think that's where the encouragement comes as well. Real quick before we wrap up, because the Braves did make a couple of roster moves over the last few days. They recalled Desbel Hernandez to Atlanta Tuesday, option Ray Curtis Gwinnett Monday. What do these moves mean for the Braves?
Not a whole lot right now. I mean, I was interested in the Ray Kerr to the starting rotation revelation. I mean, he pitched really well in multiple inning stints. I still think his real value is as a reliever, but they've got other starting options in the minors, and I don't know that necessarily you need to prioritize that project. But if they feel strongly about it, then maybe it's just something to try out. Moving Bryce Elder out of the rotation is definitely not a shocker based on the recent results. You just got to try some different things sometimes. And as much as everybody wants to see him get it together, that just hasn't happened yet. But can he go down to Gwinnett and maybe still play a role here? Absolutely. There are a whole bunch of other names on that list, but you did bring it up, and I do want to mention it briefly. Sean Murphy on his rehab assignment in Gwinnett, hitting a 450-foot home run in his first at-bat back. That looked pretty good, throwing out a runner, catching 7 innings. Maybe he could be back with his club. If not this weekend, which I don't necessarily expect, then definitely by the start of the homestand next week. And hopefully by then you figured out whatever's going on with Austin Riley's side and you can get him back in the lineup, because those two things would also give a boost to this order, which again, I don't feel like it's a question of when, or excuse me, a question of if. It's a question of when for this group, because they're too talented to hit like this over the course of 162.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. 162 games, everybody. I think they're going to wake up eventually, and they'll be all good at the plate. When we come back, we'll talk about exactly how the Braves did what they did in the Windy City Tuesday night, but we'll talk about one good that came out of that in Going Deep. This episode of the Atlanta Baseball Party is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It's the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less or 2 or more player stats and watch the winnings roll in. So Prize Picks has something easy for every sports fan, from baseball and basketball to League of Legends and everything in between. You can pick Shohei Ohtani, Connor McDavid. And if we're talking about locally, you might want to go with Anthony Edwards, because I got a feeling he's going to do some big things in the Western Conference Finals. So Prize Picks is also the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states across the country, including California, Texas, and even right here in Georgia. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like Meek Mill or Sean O'Malley? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Prize Picks also now offers Apple Pay. Sorry, Jarvis. Apple Pay for the iPhone users and the iPad users for quick and easy deposits into your account into this basketball season. So if you want to get in on the action, download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download that app today. Use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. It is so easy to use Prize Picks and get in on the action. Pick more, pick less. That easy. Nico Horner hit a game-ending infield single in the 10th inning in his return to the lineup. Chicago Cubs then beat the Atlanta Braves 4-3 to open the 3-game series Tuesday night. But Jarvis, there were some odd things going on across the entirety of that game. How weird was this loss in extras for the Braves?
Yeah, when you think about how, Charlie Warner, Charlie Morton got started off, he tell you what type of day it is for me. But yeah, when you think
Right,
about how,
odd for you too, right?
yeah, so I need to slap upside the head for a second. So yeah, not yet. But I think one of the things that really just kind of made this game feel really weird to me was the fact that Charlie Morton early on, he had 2 strikeouts, and then he ended up walking back-to-back guys. So it
Yeah.
was just seemed like it was just such weird things going on. And when you talk about Zach Short with the pop fly and dropping that easy little
Yeah.
bunny, right? Travis Darno, a pass ball. When was the last time we've seen something like that? When such a veteran guy who's been around the MLB for so long, to
Mhm.
make a mistake like that. So it just, some of those, when I just look at the overall makeup of the game, it's just, you just
Yeah.
start thinking to yourself, I'm like, man, this is just so weird. And I think Jake and Grant, Grant who just was just on with us, and Jake
Mhm.
on the postcast last night, our
Yeah.
postcast host, by the way, make sure you guys check that out. He was talking about how I think he put it perfectly. He just said this was a grinding type game, and it just made it seem like everything was a struggle. It was just seemed like everything was just a struggle, especially when you had guys like Charlie on Morton on the mound and guys at the plate just couldn't get it done.
Yeah, and it kind of took you, and the grind is, like you said, that's a great way to describe it, because it kind of took you to the bad part of the series against the San Diego Padres, which also just felt like, especially on the offensive side, it just felt like it was a grind and everything was just a struggle to make happen. And like with Charlie Morton, it was like, and of course, this is being a little bit dramatic, but it was like the best of times and the worst of times, because you have Charlie Morton strike out the side in the first inning and you're thinking, all right, Uncle Charlie, ready to rock and roll. Everything's about to be great. But then he also issued the 2 walks that you mentioned. And then it was more of the same in that second inning. Now, granted, Morton did end up striking out Horner, who hit that game winning single, but then he hit Michael Bush, and then he allowed an infield single to Dansby Swanson. So you kind of know, and then of course walked Miguel Amaya. So you kind of know that that wasn't kind of the Morton we wanted to see, especially with that walk and it loading the bases. And that's how you get to see Rick Krenitz very, very early in a game that you don't want to see. But you think also to the fact that these are the kinds of games, Jarvis, that we're seeing more often than not, with the Braves, and it is a little bit frustrating because you see signs, and we'll talk about the positives, right? Because you do see some positive signs coming from this Braves team, and you think, okay, maybe they're about to turn that corner. That corner we keep talking about them turning, and we see them turn a little bit, and then somehow we see a little bit of a regression. So you think that's what's going to happen, and then you look back just a couple weeks ago, and of course they didn't sweep the Cubs, but they had a nice series against the Cubs where they shut them out twice. So you're thinking, okay, this would be an opportunity to kind of get the bad taste of the Padres series out of our mouths. And here you come with a bit of a head scratcher from what we saw from this team last night. So yeah, it was just, I think the word that you said when we were talking pre-production was weird. And I think that's a great word for it. I think that's very apropos. I think odd is not too bad of a way to describe this game as well. But I will say this, the one thing that was encouraging, especially when you think about the fact that there were opportunities, albeit missed opportunities, like when you think about what happened in the fifth inning. But the one thing we did like that we saw and we've been waiting to see and you hope to see more of is Michael Harris II. Him being able to hit one out of the park is always going to be something that's encouraging because, again, Jarvis, we've had conversations about different parts of the order at different times, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it never seems like there's a conversation where at least one player in the order isn't doing something right. And I think this is one of those times where, okay, you definitely did not get it from the entirety of the order last night by any stretch of the imagination. But let's just keep it real to have the opportunity to see Michael Harris II do what he was able to do. I think he hit seventh last night. For him to be able to at least have something positive coming out of the bottom of the order was good.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you see from Michael Harris is he's going opposite. He went Oppo Taco, with hit the home run, and then you see him being able to contribute on the defensive side of it as well. Like with those two catches, like you talking about some run saving type stuff that was going on right there. Like, and that's what you look back and start to think like, okay, this is why the Braves gave him that contract early on, because he can affect the game on both sides. So that was really cool to see because we understand, the top of the order, right? Because those guys went, I call them the big three: Ronald Acuna, Ozzie Albies, and Matt Olson. Those guys went 0 for 13 last night.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it so weird because those guys were starting to come around, and the bottom of the order was kind of starting to see that shift and not really doing what they were supposed to do. Even going back to last year, the bottom of the order was amazing.
Yeah.
Like that 9-hole hitter was like, wow, whoever's in that 9-hole is gonna go out there and perform at a very high level. So, when you have guys like Michael Harris starting to come around and starting to see the ball well and going opposite field and going and taking that bad boy out the yard, you like, oh man, okay, Ronald, all right, Ozzie, somebody, Matt, who went 0 for 5. It's just it just goes back to what I was saying. Like, even though it's a positive to see what Michael Harris been able to do, affect both sides of in that field and at the plate, it just makes it even more weird that you start to see some light, right? You start to see him come around, and then you see the other guys who were starting to heat up a little bit.
Yeah.
They just go over. It's just like, wow, man, this is something that it is very hard to explain, and as you can see, it's kind of hard to talk about as well because it just shouldn't be. Just the numbers just don't make sense, for them to be kind of struggling like this.
Right. And I think the only thing that seems to be a constant across the entirety of the team, which always gives you some hope, because we are still having this conversation before Memorial Day, before that first mile marker, is the fact that the hard hit rates are still up for the majority of the hitters. And anytime that hard hit rate is up, that means eventually that ball is going to start to make contact in the way that you're accustomed to with the Braves, maybe just off here and there, but eventually it's going to come around. I just think it's one of those things where we can't believe we're having this conversation this late. And I think we also, and of course, I'll speak on Michael Harris II in a second, but I think the other piece for us is we're accustomed to having a conversation about portions of the order through maybe the first quarter of the season, not the entirety of the order or portions of the order at length. But thank goodness, although we saw a head scratcher of an outing for Charlie Morton, kind of up and down last night. They still have been, in totality, the pitching has been the saving grace for this Braves team. But like you said, hopefully with Michael Harris II, maybe it's a sign of good things to come. It's been kind of a slow grind because he had that home run last night, but then we hadn't seen that for a week, which again, it's not a bad thing because of what we had seen before. Because if you then go back, that was the first one, period. So for the fact that Michael Harris II has 2 home runs in the last 8 days versus the fact that we hadn't seen one the entirety of the season, Jarvis, I'm going to go with that as a thing, something for us to be encouraged about, something for Braves country to be encouraged about as well. And when we come back, we're going to talk about more things coming out of Braves country Tuesday that should encourage you guys as well. We're going to talk about that in the stretch. This episode of our Atlanta Baseball Party is also brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience, that's all the formula for winning championships. And it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. And like we've been saying to you guys, be patient because it's still not Memorial Day and you really still haven't hit that first mile marker for the Braves. But when you do, you know that eventually we're going to see the drive with them. So be patient with them, just like we want you to be with eBay Motors, because if you're patient enough to go through their website, man, oh man, are you going to see some great things. You're going to see superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. It's speed, it's power, it's style, just like what you're used to with the Braves. eBay Motors has you covered too. You always find exactly what you're looking for. That's because eBay has guaranteed fit, and that means that it's guaranteed to fit your ride or die every time, or the part, you'll get your money back for it. With eBay Motors, also, it's about burning rubber and not cash because you have all the parts you need. And most importantly, they're at the prices that you want to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive with eBay Motors. Go to ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. And eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. So, Jarvis, despite the fact that we had a head scratcher in Chicago Tuesday night to start the Braves 6-game road trip, 3 games starting in Chicago, Sean Murphy was the good news coming out of Tuesday. He started off his rehab assignment and didn't just start the rehab assignment, but he did it big with a home run dead to center field. Does Murphy look like maybe, just maybe, he might be on the mend?
Yes. Yeah, this is so encouraging.
Short answer?
Yeah. Emphatically, yes. I think this is really cool to be able to see him go out and swing the bat like that, because I remember when he first came, the Braves first traded for him and saw him in the first game of the season last year, and I was just like, man, this dude swings really, really hard. I call him, like, y'all remember the fictional character Mighty Casey. I just think about him when he's just standing at the plate and just swinging that bat so hard, and like he's just trying to doggone chop some wood or something. When he's trying to essentially hitting it out of the park. How hard he hit that ball last night. It was so cool to watch, because you talking about 450 feet, and that's one of the reasons. And we talking about this dude was hurt on opening day, T.
Yes.
That's why I just look at it from a standpoint of like, man, this is so cool for him to have that first at bat. Boom, out of the park. Like, yep, I'm back, guys. So I think that it was definitely cool to see. And also, with Travis d'Arnaud, obviously dealing with having to sit down and with the whole dizziness episode that he had. So I'm just like, all right, let's kind of get this thing back to split, because we know Travis is up there in age, and I think that having your all-star catcher back in that lineup, especially given what we've been seeing, at the top of it, specifically last night against the Chicago Cubs, I think he would be more than welcome to come back. Now, on the other side of that, I don't think he's going to return on this road trip, but I do see the way Snicker was talking. It seems like he might be coming back once they get back on the road trip from the road trip.
Yeah, and that's kind of the encouragement that I think, and kind of the tea leaves that we can read from there as well. And you're right. The example that you can use for this catching trio, if you will,
Yeah.
is another example of how the Braves have the kind of depth and always have that forward thinking mindset, because Chadwick Trump has done a solid job
Oh yeah,
in relief, right?
for sure.
So at least you have the opportunity, maybe not at the plate as far as hitting goes, but at least from a perspective of catching or calling a game, you at least know that you don't have to rush Sean Murphy back. And I think that's a super positive, something that we always talk about with the Braves having that type of depth, or even knowing, even though Zach Short had a little bit of a shaky game last night, but we got to admit that, and we'll talk about Austin Riley in a minute, but not having to rush Austin Riley back has been huge as well, because you were able to get a Zach Short. But going back to Sean Murphy and talking about what is so desperately needed with what he does, not just behind the plate, but when he's at the plate, you're talking about a guy in 2023 that had 21 home runs, that had 68 RBI. And that's the kind of numbers, those are the kind of numbers you want to see return to this team. An OPS of 844 really, really did a lot of damage in 2023 to help the Braves have the type of historic season that they had. But speaking of Austin Riley, that was also a positive that kind of came back to us in the last couple of days. We kind of were hearing rumblings, right?
Mhm.
But he was out of the lineup, of course, Tuesday. And he's one of those guys that will be sneaky kind of looking at, because like we talked about, the Braves do have a 6-game road trip. Of course, they've got 3 games in Chicago, and then they head up to Pittsburgh to take on the Pirates. He's not expected for sure to return to the lineup for the Chicago Cubs series. But Jarvis, there's a sneaky possibility that Austin Riley maybe on the tail end could actually show up, because of course he is the first time, I think Tuesday, that he had swung a bat since he started talking about the soreness in his side. He missed the game on May 12th, and then he's kind of been sidelined ever since. So I think that'll be another positive for the Braves, because he started showing signs as well before he went down.
Yeah, that's the big one. Because like you said, out of the only reason why I feel that you miss him so much is because of what he started to show before he went down against the Mets.
Mhm.
And I really feel like Riley is quiet as kept, like one of the sneaky little guys that people don't really just look at to or look to come through like he did last year. And I think that when you don't have that piece, I think that's the kind of missing piece in this lineup, because I even thinking about Sean Murphy coming back into the fold, because we know, Matt Olson struggles throughout. I know he's been, starting to heat up just a little bit lately, and
Mhm.
obviously we went over last night. But when you get guys like Sean Murphy back and guys like Austin Riley back, that gives you a little bit more flexibility to play
Yeah.
around with the lineup,
Yes.
because
Yes.
like you don't want to start playing around with it too much, but you
Mhm.
understand, like, hey, if Sean Murphy comes back and start bombing away, and Matt
Mhm.
Olson still struggling, who's to say that Snit won't go to Matt like, hey man, I want to bump you down to this fifth spot, or and move Sean Murphy up to the fourth spot, or just play around with it. There's enough justification for moving an all-star catcher to that fourth spot,
Yeah.
versus moving whoever Snip might want to play around with. Or that's an easier conversation. I guess I'm putting that way. It's easier conversation when you're talking about moving an all-star catcher into that role versus somebody else, or a role player,
Right.
or moving somebody down in the order that's valuable in the spot right ahead of you.
Yeah, and it's interesting to look at that top of the order, right? Because I
Right.
think the other piece there is sometimes continuity and a flow do matter. And I know that you
It
get to
does.
the
Yeah.
plate and it's individual, but you're kind of accustomed to, okay, what is Ronald Acuna Jr. going to do in leadoff? Most of the time, he's going to get on base, right? And sometimes he's going to get extra bases, if you will, if not just hit it out of the park. But let's just say he's in a situation where he gets extra bases. And then you get an Ozzy Albies who can either drive him in, or he can get him another base and then he's on base. Then you've got Austin Riley who can drive both of them in, Oftentimes we saw that, or he can get on base himself and then Matt Olson in that cleanup spot. The reason I'm mentioning that is because think about it, Jarvis. We haven't had a conversation for much of the first quarter of this season where we're talking about Acuna Jr., Albies, Riley, and Olson in the lineup at the same time in that flow that we saw last year that was so critical and so powerful to give this team and to give their pitchers a lead, because a lot of times this season the Braves haven't really given their pitchers a lead. So I think that's one of those things that, as you mentioned, Austin Riley being sneaky good, Austin Riley always being that sneaky. Remember last year how every conversation, especially back half of the season, we kept saying Ronald Acuna Jr. is the obvious MVP, not just for the team, but also for the league. But that second guy, Austin Riley, we kept having that conversation about him. So I do think that when he's back to his Austin Riley self, as we saw before he went down with this injury, and if the top of that order can start to kind of get a flow and find its way, I think we'll see a lot of the trickle down effect from that too, that we sneakily don't talk about, but they in a different way could set the tone for what we want to see and need to see this team do on offense. Thanks for stopping by the Atlanta Baseball Party, your home for the best Atlanta Braves talk. Remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we're free and available wherever you download your podcast. We'll see you tomorrow on the Atlanta Sports Party.